Yesterday we left Jude the Damascene with Saul and his companions in the cave where the Jordan arises. Let's start there. It rained. There were some thunderclaps in the clouds on the mountain. Then water poured down for about an hour, and then the sky was clear again. But we had already started walking eastward when the rain began, and we kept right on walking through it. Saul, that little man, had a springing step in his bandy legs. Had a springing step as if his bandy legs were soldiers' bows. He bounded along at a good clip, but my old bones are stiff. I gave thought to riding the donkey. He was talking. Mattathias and Pedaiah and I will spend 3 days in silence, observing, listening. We'll catch these ravening beasts with the lies in their throats. On the morning of the 4th day, the first day of the week, I'll dictate a letter to the council in Jerusalem. Pedaiah will carry south, and then Mattathias and I, and you, Jude, and the leaders of the synagogues will, in the righteousness of God, punish those who would destroy the people of God. Excuse me, I called behind him. How will we do this? How will we punish them? Saul stopped and turned around to answer me. My legs and my lungs were grateful for the rest. But there was another sort of panting inside me. With all my heart, I wanted to return our congregations to peace again. Oh, how I hated the people who had come to tear us apart. But I was also thinking of Ananias, so I said, how will we punish them? With words, sir, he said, searching my face with his little eyes. And with rods, and with imprisonment, he said. And with death, if that becomes necessary. With death, I said? Does it have to be death? As if my donkey were his donkey. Saul went to the little beast and untied one of the pouches and brought out 2 loaves of barley bread and a leather flask of wine. From among his own pack, he took a large piece of leather and spread it on the ground. Sir, he said, sit. We did, all 4, though he himself squatted on his heels. Saul broke the bread and we shared the wine, and while we drank, he spoke to me, teaching me as if we were in the synagogue together. Do you remember the story of Phinehas? He said. Jude, I will tell you the story of Phinehas, since it bears heavily upon this present age. Saul's brow is like a ridge of Mount Hermon, a strong outcropping. It makes his eyes look small and fierce and deep as wells. But on that day, he tilted his head with tenderness, and I saw love in him, and it was love that talked to me. For this thin young man loved the things he had to say. He said, the story tells us of a terrible deed and a yet more terrible thing. The anger of God, terrible too, but good as well, was the means that turned his wrath away and saved the people alive. Such long fingers began to trace pictures in the dust. He said, the children of Israel were camped in Shittim on the plains of Moab, east of the Jordan River. The time was nigh for them to cross into the promised land. They were at the very end of their long journey through the wilderness, Jude, 40 years in the wilderness, during which time the Lord God, who had brought them out of captivity, had also led them and fed them and kept them safe, never leaving them alone. Then it was that the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab. Moreover, they ate with Moab, they bowed down to their gods, they yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor. and the wrath of the Lord God was kindled against Israel. The Lord God commanded that all the chiefs of the people should be hung in the sun before him, and that all who had yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor should be slain, in order to turn his fierce anger away. A plague began to spread through Israel, so the entire people gathered at the door of the tent of meeting and began to weep and beg for the forgiveness of the Lord. And then, even then, while the people were weeping, a man of Israel named Zimri took into his tent a woman of Midian named Cosbi. They went into his innermost room together. Now, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, saw what was happening. He rose up and left the congregation and took a spear in his hand and went after Zimri. And finding the man and woman in the very act, he pierced them through, body to body, both bodies at once, with a single thrust of the spear. Jude? It took me a minute to realize that Saul had spoken my name. Again, staring at me, he said, Jude? Yes? What did Phinehas do to Zimri? He killed him. Yes, he killed him, said Saul. Now, hear what the Lord said. The Lord God said, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, has turned back my wrath from the people of Israel, and that he was jealous with my jealousy among them, so that I did not consume the people of Israel in my jealousy. Behold, I give him my covenant of peace. And it shall be to him and his descendants after him the covenant of a perpetual priesthood, because he was jealous for his God and made atonement for the people of Israel. Sometimes, Jude, Saul said, rising, ready to walk again. Sometimes it takes the death of one or two to atone for the sin of the whole people. That evening, I paid a Syrian farmer the price of 2 silk cushions to let us sleep on the roof of his house. Kindly, he offered us goat's milk and some dried prunes. He fed my little donkey good oats. Saul put his great head down on one of my pillows, too. Oh, how sore and weary were my old bones. Yet there was true heat in my heart now. Something was coming. Something good was coming to our dear community. I lay a long time, unmoving, thinking. This is the way with me. I can't find sleep as easily as I used to when Hodesh put her pallet down next to mine. Nor have I slept in the presence of any other person, certainly not in the presence of strangers, since the night she closed her eyes and went away from me. But Saul, the Pharisee named Saul, hardly seemed a stranger anymore. So wiry, tough, so intense. I didn't know. He was already as familiar as a fixed thing, like the moon or the mountain, or like someone's son, like my son. Suddenly he spoke, as if he just opened his mouth on a conversation that was going on in his head. He said, "It must be the zeal of a few that protects the lives of all. It must be. And death may be the only act that finally makes the difference. But death is not always a punishment. Sometimes it's a sacrifice. I promise you, Jude of Damascus," Saul said in the starry darkness, "if it ever comes to this, I will deliver even my body to be burned." Right away, he sighed and started to snore. That fast, the man was sleeping. And I thought about his poor, wretched head, because the blisters must have been breaking, and the tender flesh beneath the torn skin must have felt like fire. Sometime in the night, I woke up and found the tears were running from my eyes. Perhaps it was closer to morning. Yes, it had to be morning. It was the dark before the dawning. It seemed to me that my father had been sitting next to me, rocking with his head bent forward, rocking with his shoulders hunched, singing softly and granting me once more the great comfort of love. And nothing was changed, and every good thing was still the same, except that I was still a child, and my father had come to sing the morning prayers for me. My tears were tears of thanksgiving. I had never thought to feel so beloved again. In a sweet, bird-whistling voice, very pretty and very clear, the Hebrew words were being sung by someone in my ear. Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The first words of my baby life, they were. The words of my lying down and my rising up, both evening and morning. I woke supposing that I was home again, and that nothing was wrong, and that all was well. I woke weeping and singing, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. In my bosom it was a man's voice. It was the voice of a very old man. But beside me on the roof of the Syrian's house, another voice was singing sweetly, the voice of the young Pharisee. And still the warm tears flowed from my eyes, because Saul had roused me into the world of God and the love of God, and if all was not well yet, it would be. Together in Hebrew we sang softly, "Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who forms light and creates darkness, who makes peace and creates all things." And then I must have slipped back to sleep again, because I had this strange sense that the singing floated higher and higher until all the stars made a rain of the song, saying, "Blessed art thou, O Lord, who has chosen thy people Israel in love." That's where we'll start tomorrow.